The mayor's ambitious commitment to providing free bus service in New York City fell apart immediately once the real financial figures were revealed. This outcome shouldn't come as a surprise, since we've seen this identical scenario unfold numerous times in various cities under different political leadership. Every time a politician announces that something substantial will suddenly be offered at no cost, citizens initially respond with enthusiasm and excitement. They feel hopeful about the prospect of more manageable lives. However, reality inevitably intrudes. The true expenses become apparent, and the whole vision disintegrates like a fragile structure in strong winds. Trump identified the critical weaknesses in this proposal well ahead of others. This is because he truly grasps how finances operate, how budgets are managed, and how large urban systems actually function in practice rather than in theoretical political scenarios. This explains why New York responded with such remarkable speed following his direct criticism. His remarks stripped away the illusion and revealed the weak, shaky foundation supporting this impractical notion. The primary enormous challenge with the mayor's transportation proposal is remarkably straightforward when examined closely. New York's complete bus network already runs at a deficit without adequate funding to maintain smooth operations. The vehicles are old and deteriorating, breaking down regularly. The routes haven't been revised in years, and maintenance delays extend endlessly. The system urgently requires billions simply to sustain basic regular functions and avoid total breakdown. Therefore, when someone suddenly declares enthusiastically that all fares should disappear completely, the financial bleeding becomes utterly devastating and impossible to maintain. Transportation specialists calculated the real figures and determined this supposedly brilliant proposal would require approximately $700 to $800 million annually just to remain operational. This isn't insignificant money or spare change you discover between furniture. This isn't something a city leader can generate from nothing simply because the idea sounds appealing and creates positive emotions. This illustrates the essential reality that continuously gets overlooked. A transit network doesn't care about emotions or positive intentions. It demands concrete financial data, balanced financial plans, and the strict principles of matching supply with demand without failing. Trump presented the harsh fundamental reality without softening it. He stated plainly that the city cannot function and prosper based on attractive fantasies and hopeful speculation. He clarified that the calculations simply don't permit this dramatic transformation without disastrous outcomes. And Trump was exactly correct. Historical records provide unmistakable proof that municipalities which remove major income sources without establishing a reliable alternative plan unavoidably wind up cutting other vital services throughout their operations. They destroy public safety initiatives. They neglect essential maintenance work. They dismiss employees in enormous numbers. Everything slows down progressively. Everything deteriorates and weakens until the entire framework becomes unstable. We observed this precise disaster in 1972 when New York City almost went bankrupt because officials completely disregarded financial realities and refused to accept the truth. The immediate response from MTA leadership confirmed this argument conclusively. Their director, Janno Lieber, publicly acknowledged that the mayor's concept lacked any specific, comprehensive strategy. He characterized the suggestion as significantly incomplete and poorly developed. That's the courteous diplomatic way of indicating the scheme was nowhere close to being ready for actual implementation with real finances and genuine repercussions. And that's precisely why ordinary citizens across New York began experiencing serious concern and distrust. They observed a leader making an extraordinarily large commitment without taking the time to present actual figures or clarify where the funding would come from. That's why people started declaring the concept failed when examined carefully. It didn't collapse due to political partisanship or individual criticisms. It collapsed because financial reality inevitably overcomes fantasy every single instance without fail. Another vitally significant aspect of this complicated situation concerns the strong response from Governor Kathy Hochul. She stated publicly that the transit network still requires fare revenue to operate effectively. That one damaging statement completely undermined the entire central argument of the mayor's attention-grabbing plan. When the governor, the transit specialists, and the president all align in expressing identical concerns at the same moment, the proposal loses complete credibility instantaneously. This perfectly illustrates how fragile concepts break down under genuine examination. They fall apart when individuals with real expertise challenge them forcefully using evidence rather than sentiment and emotion. Trump comprehends New York City on a significantly deeper and more personal basis than the mayor possibly could. He built enormous structures across that city over many years. He directly managed difficult labor union discussions, navigated countless regulatory approvals, handled building postponements, worked within restrictive financial limitations, and endured rigorous official reviews. He understands precisely how the city behaves and responds when funding suddenly vanishes and becomes unavailable. That's why his statement carried such significant influence and credibility. He cautioned clearly that the city urgently requires steadiness and consistency, not reckless imagination and irresponsible testing. He indicated that thoughtless proposals always damage working-class communities first and most severely. And he's completely right regarding that difficult truth. When public transportation networks lose funding and become insolvent, it's invariably the economically disadvantaged areas that suffer extremely delayed buses, thoroughly damaged facilities, and absurdly extended waiting periods in awful circumstances. So paradoxically, a no-cost bus scheme actually injures and harms the exact individuals it purportedly seeks to assist and defend. The most intriguing element of this whole narrative concerns how the mayor began quickly modifying his statements and retreating. Before facing all the opposition, he confidently described the plan as a complete, extensive initiative ready to begin. After facing mounting disapproval, he abruptly characterized it as simply a trial program, merely a limited experiment, a remote future possibility that could occur eventually. That significant transformation demonstrates that the concept lacked power and meaningful content from the absolute start. Solid proposals with strong foundations don't mysteriously alter form when questioned. Only inadequate ideas shift and change frantically. This reveals that terminology invariably adjusts and evolves when officials desperately attempt to conceal apparent weaknesses and difficulties, and citizens can definitely detect this obvious maneuver. They can recognize immediately when something appears fraudulent and calculated. The residents of New York responded with frustration because they felt intentionally confused and tricked. They desire improved, more sanitary, more dependable buses, certainly, but they desire genuine honesty even more urgently. They desire an authentic financial strategy with concrete numbers, not a superficial political catchphrase created to secure support. That's why this expanded into such an enormous, divisive matter so quickly. New Yorkers understand their city requires substantial resources to manage. They recognize fundamentally that nothing in existence is genuinely free without someone bearing the cost elsewhere. So when they eventually discovered the substantial concealed expenses hiding underneath, they immediately understood the plan wasn't credible or authentic. Trump's forceful reaction generated additional intense scrutiny because he focused on federal financial dependencies. New York depends substantially on Washington for numerous vital functions: protection assistance, crisis relief funding, residential support initiatives, and crucial transit resources all originate from national sources. If a mayor carelessly advances an enormous concept without any logical plan or revenue source, the federal administration will understandably scrutinize everything and possibly withdraw assistance. Trump merely articulated openly what numerous federal representatives were already considering quietly. And once he expressed it publicly for all to witness, every vulnerable, exposed element of the scheme suddenly became visible in harsh illumination. This demonstrates conclusive evidence of a significantly deeper structural challenge affecting leadership. Numerous Democratic officials routinely begin with complete emotion and sentiment. They sincerely think that positive intentions by themselves are sufficient to achieve success, but municipalities require rigorous reasoning and organization, not merely optimism and aspirations. They require thorough financial blueprints, practical schedules, and reliable contingency strategies for when circumstances turn problematic. When Democrats disregard these fundamentals and avoid the challenging responsibilities, their impressive concepts unavoidably disintegrate. That's why numerous major American municipalities currently face difficulties with criminal activity, people without housing, and deterioration. They lead with emotions rather than framework and responsibility. The transportation proposal failed dramatically because it attempted to avoid the most difficult element entirely. It attempted to disregard and circumvent the calculations completely. And historical experience demonstrates that avoiding the challenging component invariably results in disappointment. Trump grasps that basic principle naturally. He might communicate in an uncomplicated, straightforward manner without elaborate expression, but his judgment regarding expense and danger proves accurate remarkably frequently. He identifies a flawed plan instantly when he encounters one. New York already confronts overwhelming elevated expenses, quickly increasing requirements, and exceptionally restrictive financial plans with zero flexibility available. Including another enormous expense with absolutely zero revenue source isn't genuine leadership whatsoever. It's careless and hazardous conduct. And New Yorkers perceived this reality right away. That's why the subject became explosive throughout digital platforms. That's why the complete city responded so vigorously and dramatically. Citizens comprehended that the scheme didn't correspond with actual conditions in any substantial manner. Trump's single direct declaration achieved what the complete municipal administration couldn't accomplish. It compelled the difficult reality into public view where everyone could observe it. It forced citizens to actually examine the calculations rather than the emotions. It forced the mayor to justify something he couldn't reasonably explain using evidence. And in the unforgiving realm of governance, that's precisely how inadequate concepts experience agonizing conclusions. This explains why the city became engulfed in dispute. This explains why the plan disintegrated. And this explains why Trump's perspective had such destructive influence. Inadequate concepts fail because they rest on optimism rather than evidence. And this free transportation illusion now functions as an ideal educational illustration of why cities must acknowledge expenses before making substantial commitments. This represents an entirely foreseeable breakdown because it mirrors the same sequence we've observed in numerous cities across numerous years. When officials promote concepts without figures, the concepts break apart the instant someone requests the accounting. The initial thing citizens recognized after the plan collapsed was authentic anxiety spreading throughout municipal departments. Employees immediately grasped that removing bus fares without obtaining new funding would result in severe reductions in different areas. In basic terms, if you eliminate one revenue stream, you must eliminate one function elsewhere. That's simply logical reasoning. Trump highlighted this elementary reality, and that alone generated more understanding than the complete city administration accomplished. This illustrates how effective straightforward leadership becomes when the governmental structure becomes disoriented and confused. New Yorkers responded so intensely because they detect something significantly more profound occurring. They witnessed a mayor who committed to an enormous concept but couldn't clarify its expense truthfully. Citizens have confidence in officials who communicate honestly regarding boundaries and restrictions. When officials act as if there are zero limitations at all, citizens abandon trust remarkably quickly. And that's precisely what transpired here. The instant citizens observed hundreds of millions absent from the financial plan, they understood the scheme was never genuine. It was a declaration, not a framework. Trump's caution clarified the challenge. He stated, "You cannot operate an enormous complicated city with comforting concepts that don't align with financial actuality." And historical records strongly validate this perspective. When San Francisco, Detroit, and Chicago attempted comparable free initiatives without appropriate financing, their networks failed, functions worsened, postponements became more extended, and residents abandoned the cities in large groups. Cities deteriorate swiftly when officials allow sentiment to substitute calculation, and the mayor entered that predicament entirely. Another significant observation concerns how Democratic officials characteristically respond when evidence emerges. Rather than correcting the calculations honestly, they modified the communication frantically. The mayor performed precisely the identical action. He altered the designation of the plan continually. Initially, it was a complete comprehensive scheme. Subsequently, it mysteriously transformed into a trial initiative, then a perspective for the future. When language shifts this rapidly, it indicates the concept never possessed solid grounding. Genuine concepts don't require different labels to withstand disapproval. Only weak concepts require perpetual modification. Trump's position on this matter stays uncomplicated and steady. You cannot damage a functioning network by eliminating its revenue. And you cannot safeguard economically disadvantaged people by undermining the function they depend on most heavily. This is what numerous individuals overlook. When buses lose funding, they don't get better in prosperous neighborhoods. They deteriorate in economically struggling neighborhoods. And that's why Trump cautioned so promptly. He has observed how cities decline when officials disregard fundamental financial restraint. The most grave element of this matter concerns how confidence became impaired. Once citizens observe one concept disintegrate, they start doubting everything additional. They question if the subsequent significant commitment also conceals the reality. This decelerates leadership. Every department becomes cautious. Every employee anticipates explicit directions, and every citizen becomes more difficult to persuade. This is the price of impractical governance. The harm persists well beyond when the concept expires. Another thing that made this situation significant was the governor's response when Kathy Hochul indicated the transportation network still requires fair revenue. She revealed the discrepancy without even criticizing him. That's the strength of evidence. You don't require argumentation. You simply declare the reality. And the reality here was uncomplicated. The funding doesn't exist. Trump's caution and the governor's declaration collectively enabled the public to understand the complete situation. New York cannot function on trials. It's excessively large. It operates excessively quickly and bears excessive obligation. Major networks fail when officials impose concepts that disregard organization. The free bus concept disregarded organization entirely. It overlooked expense. It overlooked resources. It overlooked extended maintenance requirements. It even overlooked that transit employees must receive payment. A city cannot overlook these elements, and Trump's remark reminded everyone. This occurrence will influence city governance for an extended period. The mayor will experience increased difficulty advancing new concepts. Citizens will require calculations before they approve. Journalists will pose more challenging inquiries. Departments will resist. This occurs when confidence decreases early. And this is why accountable leadership matters so significantly in the initial year. Errors made early are extremely difficult to reverse. Trump emerged appearing more credible because he expressed reality before the network collapsed, and when reality ultimately appeared, citizens recognized he was correct. This is why his perspective still affects nationwide discussions. He doesn't require sophisticated language. He doesn't require extended presentations. He only requires directing attention to evidence everyone else evades. And evidence possesses greater strength than promotional phrases. The collapse of this scheme cautions every city. It demonstrates officials must acknowledge calculation. They must acknowledge expenses. They must acknowledge organization. Exceptional nations and cities deteriorate when officials disregard these fundamentals, and historical records demonstrate this repeatedly. The free bus concept is simply another illustration of a city attempting to avoid the challenging element. What transpires subsequently depends on whether New York selects practicality or imagination. If it selects practicality, it will require genuine financing strategies. If it selects imagination, it will witness additional failed concepts. Trump's communication directed the city toward practicality. The mayor's communication directed it toward imagination. And citizens must now determine which direction they desire. Ultimately, this matter was never regarding buses. It was regarding reality. It was regarding honesty. It was regarding acknowledging the restrictions that maintain cities functioning. The free bus concept didn't collapse because Trump criticized it. It collapsed because actual conditions revealed it. And when actual conditions communicate, governance must respond.